If you are a Christian who believes in religious liberty, especially if you're a pastor, some really big news just dropped the other day, and it's really big news, but it's really no news. So it's kind of interesting in that way. And it deals with this. What can a pastor say, or what can a church do regarding politics, issues that are hot topics, candidates that are up for election? What can they do? What can they say? Can a pastor be in trouble if he mentions names of candidates, especially if he comes out and supports them? How does this all work? Now, this should never have had any impact whatsoever on churches, because if something is right, we're supposed to say it. And if it's not right, we're not supposed to say it. If there's a truth, and if there's a subject like abortion and the LGBTQ agenda and on and on, if it's something that is an issue of moral clarity and it's right and wrong, I'm supposed to say it from the pulpit, and it doesn't matter at all what the government says. I shouldn't be afraid of 501c3, a tax-exempt status, none of that should matter. But this is a really big issue because of something that's called the Johnson Amendment that has been very misunderstood. And the IRS has finally given some clarification on it. So what happened here was there was a lawsuit by the National Religious Broadcasters, Intercessors for America, and a couple of churches. They sued the IRS because they wanted to have the IRS give some kind of a clarification on exactly what the Johnson Amendment means. So this is a really big deal, but it really shouldn't matter too much in the end. So what is the Johnson Amendment? That's what we need to talk about. The Johnson Amendment came out in 1954. And what happened was the United States Senator Lyndon Johnson from Texas was running for re-election. He was facing a guy who was a state senator whose name was Dudley Doherty. And it seemed that Lyndon B. Johnson was going to win. But Doherty was really getting a lot of support from some nonprofit groups, and this really began to worry Johnson. In the end, it turned out Johnson did win, but he decided to silence his opponents, his political enemies. And so he proposed a change to the IRS tax code in section 501c3, which defines, of course, tax-exempt organizations. So according to the Johnson Amendment, the change to the tax code, when it defines a tax-exempt organization, it's limited to an organization that, quote, does not participate in or intervene in, including the publishing or distributing of its statements, any political campaign on behalf of any candidate for public office. So in 1987, they added some words in opposition to. So let me read it the way it stood after that. And a 501c3 tax-exempt organization is one that does not participate in or intervene in, including the publishing or distributing of statements, any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office. So in other words, if you want to be a 501c3 organization, that you cannot be involved in publishing, distributing statements, etc., about a candidate. Now, if there are two candidates running, one is very pro-abortion, one is very anti-abortion or pro-life, and I'm putting out pro-life information, then someone might say, well, he's supporting the candidate, even if I didn't say the candidate. So this gets to be a really murky area. Now, one thing, this is kind of a side point that we need to understand, is that churches are automatically tax exempt. Automatically. Most of the times they'll file, to get all the paperwork, but they're automatically tax exempt. And so that's just a side point we need to understand. Most people don't understand that. But technically, churches being tax-exempt organizations fall under this prohibition, but there has always been agreement that the Johnson Amendment was never meant for churches. But some people are afraid. They're really afraid of the government. They're afraid of the IRS. What happens if we say something? What happens if I preach a political sermon and suddenly we lose our tax-exempt status? What do we do? Now, again, it shouldn't matter. If there's an issue that's important and you're a pastor, you need to speak on it. That is your job. As I say often in our church, the government has taken things from our area when they talk about things of morality, that I have more right to speak on that than the president or the court or anybody else, because my job is telling people how the Bible tells us we're supposed to live morally. And suddenly abortion becomes a political agenda and I can't speak on it. Well, that's stupid, because that is my job to talk about it. So it really shouldn't change anything, but people get afraid, oh, don't talk about that. We're not supposed, we're church, we're supposed to be separate from all that. So what do we do? So the IRS has finally put out some clarification. This is what we believe. So what happened is I mentioned this lawsuit from the National Religious Broadcasters, Intercessors for America, a couple of churches. They sued the IRS about the Johnson Amendment. And because we're in the Trump administration now, things are looking different. And so they came up with what is called a joint motion for entry of consent judgment. Basically what that is the two parties agree on a statement. They bring it to the court. If the court signs off on it, then it's all settled and everything's good. And I haven't heard yet whether the court has signed this, but regardless, this is very important because the IRS has said, okay, this is where we think the Johnson Amendment is to be applied and where it's not to be applied. And basically, it's not to be applied to churches. So I'm going to show you this thing here. Here is the statement they came out with, the joint motion for entry of consent judgment. And I'm going to show you a few places, if you can see this on your screen. Right here on number 4, where I have it highlighted, plaintiffs asked this court to enter declaratory relief that the Johnson Amendment unconstitutionally prohibits 501c3 organizations from engaging in political speech, and injunctive relief to prohibit enforcement of the Johnson Amendment insofar as it operates to prohibit political speech. So basically what that means is declaratory relief that, hey, tell us that this doesn't affect churches, and injunctive relief to prohibit enforcement. This is actually doing something about it. Don't enforce the Johnson Amendment against churches, because that is not what it was all about. So it's nice to have an IRS document that actually says this. Now, down here in number 7, it says, when a house of worship in good faith speaks to its congregation, this is interesting, through its customary channels of communication, that's preaching, that's your live streaming, things like that, on matters of faith in connection with religious services concerning electoral politics viewed through the lens of religious faith, it neither participates nor intervenes in political campaign within the ordinary meaning of those words. To participate in political campaign is to take part in the political campaign, and to intervene in a political campaign is to interfere with the outcome or course of the political campaign. Then it gives, hey, we just looked these words up in the dictionary. Bona fide communications internal to a house of worship between the house of worship and its congregation in connection with religious services do neither of those things any more than does a family discussion concerning candidates. Thus, communications from a house of worship to its congregation in connection with religious services through its usual channels of communication on matters of faith do not run afoul of the Johnson Amendment as properly interpreted. So basically, that what it says there is, if I have as a pastor stand there before my congregation, or do videos that I might do just in the normal case, I'm not going out and doing some extra political, not like I'm setting up a political action committee in our church, but the normal stuff that I'm doing. If I talk about issues and if I talk about candidates, it says it's just like me sitting down with my family, get my wife and my kids all together and say, okay, look, let's talk about this. This is what Trump was doing. This is what Biden was doing, whatever. It's just like having a family conversation. And they say the Johnson Amendment was never meant to stop that. I, as a pastor, am supposed to tell my people what they need to hear. And sometimes there needs to be some clarity. Sometimes I might need to say, look, well, like for this last election cycle, hey, you know what? This is what Trump believes. This is what Harris believed, or whatever it happens to be. And I don't usually call names, like that's kind of obvious so much, but I might say it. This is what when Obama came out, he wasn't for homosexuality, then he was, and I'll call names like that. Well, you can't do that. Oh, yes, you can. Regardless of what the IRS says, you can do that because you're trying to teach your people. Now, getting things to areas that don't really have anything with morality and what is called religion, that's different. Maybe I shouldn't have, okay, we're going to meet on Sunday morning this week. We're going to be talking about, I don't know, some, political thing like, our town wants to build a bridge. And so we're going to have a whole service about not building the bridge. That's not an issue of morality. That's not my job. That is for the government. Okay. But when you start talking about issues of right and wrong, even things like immigration, abortion, Pride Month, the LGBTQ agenda, the military, a lot of things like that. It's so closely in time with morality that this is my job. It's my job, and it's your job if you're a pastor to instruct people on how they're supposed to think about these things, to teach them from the Bible. Okay. So it's not like our job is, well, we're trying to get this person in office. No, we're trying to see some morality out there the best we can. Nobody's going to be perfect, of course, but we're trying to instruct people on how to think about these. And obviously, of course, they have to end up making their own decisions. I want to, let's see, come down here a little bit more. We're in 9. This was interesting. I'm going to read just part of it here where I have it highlighted. It says, for many houses of worship, the exercise of their religious belief includes teaching or instructing their congregations in all aspects of life. That's our job. We're supposed to be teaching people. We'll just stay with the gospel. Well, the Bible is about more than just the gospel. It's about a lot of things. By the way, if we don't stand up, we're not going to be able to preach the gospel like we do. If no Christians voted, which is really a dumb thing, who's going to be in office? I mean, they'd be shutting down churches after a while. Look at countries that do that. Okay, so anyway, many houses of worship, the exercise of their religious beliefs includes teaching or instructing their congregations in all aspects of life. That is exactly what we're supposed to do, okay? All aspects of life, including guidance concerning impact of faith on the choices inherent in electoral politics. Yes, good. Interpreting the Johnson Amendment to reach such communications would create serious tension within the First Amendment's establishment cause. Now, this is interesting. I'm going to explain this. That broad interpretation would treat religions that do not speak directly to matters of electoral politics more favorably than religions that do so, favoring some religions over others based on their speech to their own congregation in connection with religious services through customary channels of worship and religious communication. The clearest, well, it quotes here now from a court case. The clearest command of the establishment clause is that the government may not officially prefer one religious denomination over another. So let me explain a little bit about exactly what they're saying there. And what they're saying there is dealing with the establishment clause of the First Amendment. The First Amendment is such a great thing. But the First Amendment has several things in it. I'm going to read the whole thing to you, then focus just on one clause. The First Amendment says this: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So there's really two phrases that really enter in our conversation with us. And one is called the Establishment Clause and one is called the Free Exercise Clause. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. That's the Establishment Clause. Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's the Free Exercise Clause. But the one that this is talking about is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. What does that mean? So this IRS statement is saying that the Johnson Amendment, if it was applied to churches, it actually respects an establishment of religion. Well, how does that work? We need to understand the Establishment Clause, which really should be a whole video itself, but let me just try to give it to you carefully. The Establishment Clause basically says that the United States Congress cannot make a law about establishment of religion. What does that mean? It means exactly what it says. Congress can't make a law that has anything to do with establishing religion. It cannot tell you you have to go to church. It cannot tell you that you can't go to church. It cannot tell you which church you should go to. It cannot say, this is our state church. The United States Congress cannot do that. It does not say that Congress cannot even elevate one a little more. You know, maybe every person in Congress is a Christian. Of course, it's going to be Christian stuff. I mean, it doesn't say you can't do that. It doesn't say you can't celebrate it. It doesn't say you can't celebrate Christmas or anything like that. It's specifically about Congress. If you're not Congress, it doesn't apply to you. Now, there's more to say on this here in just a minute. But you have to understand that this was made at a time in the Bill of Rights when there was state establishment of religions. You did not see the United States as one entity at the time. You saw it as the different states bonding together. And we have become much more federalized now, obviously, than we were at the beginning. And so you had state establishments of religion. In fact, one example, Maryland, there was a skirmish between Catholics and Protestants, and they passed the Act of Toleration in 1649, which obviously was before all this, but just giving an understanding what life was like. The act provided for freedom of religion because it was a very Catholic state or colony, but it gave freedom of religion only for those, quote, professing to believe in Jesus Christ. So you can have freedom of religion, but it's only for the people who believe in Jesus Christ. And then it went on to state that if you speak derogatorily about the Trinity, you face the death penalty. So this is the kind of situation that America was. America never was just do whatever you want and don't elevate anything, just don't even talk about Christianity or any kind of religion. No, what the First Amendment did, the First Amendment said, okay, the Congress, United States Congress, cannot establish a certain religion. The Congress cannot say this will be a Catholic nation. This will be a Baptist nation. It doesn't say that it can't do anything that encourages any of those, but we can't establish this. Now, obviously, the point was you're not supposed to be elevating one, any higher than another, because that would kind of be establishment. But to talk about Christmas or talk about whatever, this is not establishing a certain religion. But understand, for the greater majority of the people, then it was Christianity, and they wanted you to be able to choose between Catholicism or some Protestant church congregation. You choose what you want, but it had to be Christian often, which is kind of interesting. People don't understand that. And so it said the United States Congress cannot do it, understanding that there were state establishment of religions. As a matter of fact, James Madison, who was so intricately involved in all this, he wanted to prohibit state establishment of religion. At the time they were putting the Bill of Rights together, but his colleagues dropped it. They said no. And so when they passed the Bill of Rights in the First Amendment, there still was state establishment of religion. A state could establish its own religion, just not the federal government. The First Amendment technically, originally, only did one thing in the Establishment Clause. It did not allow the United States Congress to establish a religion. It said nothing about the executive branch. It said nothing about the Supreme Court, said nothing about anything, the Congress. Now, something that happened later on, the First Amendment Establishment Clause has begun to be understood to apply to everybody, the states. And that came about in the 14th Amendment that came later. The 14th Amendment dealt with slavery. And there's a lot of discussion, obviously, about all those. But basically, through the 14th Amendment, people have interpreted it to apply the whole Bill of Rights, even to the states. So it's the general understanding today that if it's in the Bill of Rights, it also applied to the states. So technically, at first, it was only the United States Congress could not make any law establishing of religion, about establishing a religion. Not that you can't go to church, that you have to go to church or whatever. The Congress had to be mute about your religion. Okay, you do what you want to do. That's what it was. But now under the 14th Amendment, many people understand, okay, this also means a state. State of Indiana can't establish religion. No, I don't think they should. That's not what the original intent of the Establishment Clause was there. So when we get back to this IRS document here, what they're saying here is, if the Johnson Amendment applies to churches, what that means is a church that believes that they should be speaking out against moral matters is going to come under threat of losing their 501c3 status, and a church that does not believe they should speak out about these matters is not going to be under threat. So you have two churches that speak what they think is the truth. One is, we don't think we should say anything about this, and the other is, we want to say something about this. So what you have here is unequal treatment of churches. So the IRS, if the Johnson Amendment applied to churches, the IRS would be saying, we don't like churches that speak out about political matters, which disenfranchises them, and it elevates the churches that don't speak out about these matters. Now, I don't know, that's a really strong argument, but I just find that really, really interesting, that the IRS is actually coming right out and saying this. Hey, we think according to the First Amendment that we cannot apply the Johnson Amendment to churches. So I just want to finish up with one more, number 10 here. You can read the whole document. It's really not all that long. It says, for these reasons, this is kind of a summary, the Johnson Amendment does not reach speech by a house of worship to its congregation in connection with religious services through its customary channels of communication on matters of faith concerning electoral politics viewed through the lens of religious faith. So if I get up and I talk to my people in the next election cycle and I say, look, so-and-so is running and this is what they believe, and I don't think we can vote for that. The IRS, at this point anyway, is not going to come after us. Now, it doesn't make a difference to me. Nothing is going to change about what I say, because I'm going to say it I've always, if I can't tell you the truth, what am I even doing in this job? So it's not going to make a difference to me. I'm going to just go on, keep talking like I did, just talking more about the issues. If a name drops because they support or don't support an issue, that's fine. I've never balked away from that. But it's the issues. It's not so much a candidate, it's the issues. So I'm going to keep talking about it like I always did. It's not going to change anything for me, and it shouldn't change anything for you. If you're a pastor who says, oh, finally, I can talk about the truth to my congregation, I think you need to quit right now. You just need to stop, because if the government can tell you what you're going to say and not say, and you're going to listen to them, you just need to go out and you need to go dig ditches somewhere. You need to go be a gas station attendant or something. I just do something else. Don't call yourself a pastor, because you're not doing your job. So I just find this very interesting. This doesn't give us any more freedom. It's just the IRS recognizing what we have always known, that the Johnson Amendment does not apply to churches. So I hope that is a blessing and help to you. I'll see you next time. God bless.